Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true creepy stories about abandoned cabins exploration on Halloween night. People who went exploring old cabins on Halloween night and found something that was never meant to be seen. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share. Thank you all. Now, let's begin. We found the cabins just after dark off this narrow fire trail that peeled away from Route 38. Somewhere along the way, cell service dropped off completely, which we took as a good sign. That's what we wanted after all. No distractions, just the four of us in the woods. It was Halloween. But not the kind with candy and costumes. This was Caleb's idea. He called it a real Halloween. Said we ditch the parties and cheap haunted houses and do something actually unsettling. No lights, no neighbors, no plan. Just Appalachian folklore, whatever weirdness we could scare up, and a night out where things might actually feel strange. He mentioned the cabins halfway through the drive, like it was an afterthought. Said he'd seen them years ago with his uncle on some camping trip when he was a kid. Claimed his uncle told him to stay away, didn't give a reason, just said they were wrong. Of course, Caleb said it with that grin he always wore when he was setting us up for something. We didn't buy it. Thought it was just more of his usual crap. Then we found them. They weren't grouped together like a campsite. More like someone had dropped them along the trail and forgot they existed. The first one barely counted. No door, a sagging roof, and moss swallowing the whole front frame. The second looked like something out of a horror film, with a huge pair of bleached antlers nailed over the doorway. The third one was strangely intact. Not new, but solid. Windows weren't shattered. The door hung straight. It even had a stovepipe poking out of the roof. We picked that one, obviously. I remember hesitating at the door, not for any specific reason. It just didn't feel like a place people should be. The air was dry, but there was this weird static feeling, like the air was holding its breath. Still, I stepped inside with the others. It was Halloween. I didn't want to be the one who bailed first. The floor creaked under every step. Dust floated in the lantern light as Caleb set it on the ground. The walls were bare, except for a few rusty nails. No furniture besides a rickety table and a pile of what looked like animal bedding in one corner. Caleb cracked open a bottle of bourbon and passed it around like we were in some backwoods coming-of-age movie. I only took one sip. Something about the place made me want to keep my head clear. That's when I found the photo. It was tucked behind a warped board near the back wall, black and white, folded neatly down the center. 4 people standing in front of the same cabin we were in. Same door, same warped window, even the same tree leaning near the porch. And one of them looked exactly like Caleb. Not sort of. Not a passing resemblance. Exactly like him. Same lopsided grin, same ears that stuck out just a little too far, same relaxed posture he always had when he thought he was being funny. We all laughed it off, even Caleb. He said something like, "Guess I've got a long-lost Appalachian twin," but he didn't ask to keep the photo, didn't even look at it again. I held on to it because something about it didn't sit right. The other 3 people in the photo looked wrong. One of them was standing at an angle, not quite facing the camera. Another's eyes were just missing, not damaged, not scratched out, just not there. That was the first time I felt the fear crawl in. Later, after everyone else passed out, Caleb by the stove, Elle and John near the far wall, I laid there with my eyes open, listening to the woods. The lantern had gone out, but the dark wasn't total. It had this faint gray glow to it, like the moonlight was trying to push through but not quite making it. Then I saw someone walking between the trees. Slow, measured, not random. They walked like they knew exactly where they were going. No flashlight, no phone light. But they didn't trip once. Just kept pacing. Back and forth, Edo aft. I thought maybe it was Caleb at first, but I looked over and saw him still curled up on the floor. Whoever was outside, they weren't stumbling around. They moved like they belonged there. Eventually, they stopped and turned toward the cabin. I couldn't see a face. It was too dark for that, but I knew they were looking right at me. That was the worst part. The certainty. Like they'd known I'd be awake. Like they were waiting for me to notice. Then the air shifted. It didn't get cold. It just got heavy, thick, like it had weight. Like the trees had all leaned in closer without making a sound. I didn't sleep after that. By morning, Caleb was gone. At first, we figured he'd wandered off to scare us. Classic Caleb move. But his boots were still by the door. His bag was next to the stove, untouched. Phone still charging, half a granola bar sticking out of the top pocket. We called for him. Walked the trail in both directions. Nothing. We checked the other cabins. The first one looked the same. Still useless, still empty. The second one had changed. The walls were covered in handprints. Muddy, wet, layered over each other from floor to ceiling. Different sizes, different shapes, but none of them right. The fingers were too long, the palms too wide. Some prints looked like they'd been pressed in with serious force. Others were delicate, almost careful. In the cabin we slept in, we found Caleb's name carved into the underside of the table. Deep gouges. Jagged. Like whoever did it was using a dull knife or didn't care if they broke the tip. There were 3 other names carved next to his. I didn't recognize any of them. The weird part was that the cuts in the wood looked old, like years old, dull gray around the edges. That's when Elle said we had to leave. John didn't argue, neither did I. We packed fast. As I was getting my stuff, I reached behind the same plank where I'd hidden the photo. It wasn't there. Instead, I found another photo. Same spot, same size, same black and white, same cabin. Only now, it was us. Elle, John, me, and a 4th figure standing off to the side, tall, blurry. The face just didn't render, like something had smeared the image right at that spot. We hiked back without talking much. Elle wiped her face every few minutes. John stared straight ahead like he couldn't even register what was happening. My legs were trembling by the time we hit the pavement. That night, I couldn't stop picturing the pacing figure, the way it walked like it belonged there, like it had time. After that, John stopped replying to my messages. Elle packed up and moved 2 states away without telling anyone, deleted her socials. My cousin Silas drove in from Raleigh for Halloween weekend. We hadn't hung out properly in a while, so we figured we'd do something a little different. We ended up deciding to check out the old mining cabins past the ridge behind my place. They're not on any official maps anymore, but everyone local sort of knows they're there. Just past the tree line, tucked into the hillside where the company town used to be. They'd been abandoned decades ago after the mine closed and the workers all moved off. Technically, they're condemned, but there's no fencing or warning signs or anything. If anything, it seemed like people had just forgotten they were even there. It was late afternoon when we set out. We packed a couple bottles of water, a flashlight just in case, and an energy bar each. The trail isn't marked, so we had to navigate by memory and a half screenshot of an old hiking forum post someone had made years ago. Took us about an hour to get up there. The woods weren't dense, but the trail got weirdly narrow toward the top, like it was being gently choked off by brush. Nothing dramatic, just enough to notice. The first cabin came into view at a bend in the hill. Honestly, it looked like it was losing a fight with gravity. Half the roof had fallen in, and the chimney had this big vertical crack that split it almost clean down the center. We walked around the outside first. The back wall was caved in, and the porch had mostly collapsed. Inside wasn't much better: broken floorboards, leaf piles in all the corners, a few rusted nails sticking out of a crossbeam. Glass from shattered windows still clung to parts of the sill like teeth. But weirdly, it didn't feel creepy. Just done, like it had long since stopped trying to be anything. It didn't feel like something bad had happened there. It just felt empty. We explored 3 cabins altogether. Took a bunch of photos, joked around a bit. Silas tried to pry off this rusted iron wood stove door at one of them. He actually managed to drag it a few feet, making this awful scraping sound that echoed through the trees. It sounded hollow, like it was scraping against the bones of the place, if that makes sense. We laughed, mostly because the noise was ridiculous and he looked like he was hauling a ship anchor. He gave up pretty quickly. The last cabin was different. It sat just a little off from the others, further down a slope, almost like it had been placed separately on purpose. Right away, you could tell it was in better shape. No roof damage, no broken windows, no trash around it, no beer cans or fire pit rings, or the kind of mess you'd expect from other hikers or teens sneaking off. It looked preserved. Silas stopped at the porch and kind of squinted at it, then said, "This one's weird." Like it's still watching or something. Coming from him, that gave me pause. Silas doesn't do nerves. He's the kind of guy who laughs during horror movies and once slept in a cemetery on a dare. But this time, his voice had this quiet edge to it, like he wasn't sure if he wanted to laugh or not. I brushed it off and went inside. The inside was bare, but not in a trashed way. There was a cot frame against one wall, a rocking chair that had clearly seen better days, and this built-in shelf on the far wall that immediately caught my attention, because it wasn't empty. There were maybe 24 objects lined up on the shelf, all small, all weirdly delicate looking. They were made out of twine, bits of bark, and in some cases, definitely small bones. Little shapes that looked like nets or tangled cages or maybe charms of some kind. Some were looped, others were bound in these tight knotted patterns that made them hard to look at for too long. They didn't seem decorative, they seemed placed. Silas stayed by the door, just stood there, one foot inside, one out, watching me. I asked him what was up. He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at the shelf like he expected something to move. Then he said, "We should go." It wasn't a suggestion. It was quiet but sharp, almost flat. I picked up one of the objects without really thinking. It was one of the net-looking ones, hollow inside, no bigger than a pine cone, and way lighter than I expected. The moment I lifted it from the shelf, the back door slammed shut. Loud, violent, the kind of slam that makes your ribs clench up. We both jumped. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anyone behind me. But that door hadn't creaked shut or swung in the wind. It slammed. Like someone had run up behind me and kicked it with everything they had. Silas came in fast then, grabbed my arm, not hard but firm, and whispered, "Put it back. We need to go." I put it back. I didn't even look behind the shelf. We walked out. Not running, but definitely not dawdling. I think we were both trying really hard to act like everything was fine until we cleared the slope and hit the tree line again. That's when we stopped and actually breathed. Silas finally told me what he saw. He said when the door slammed, he saw something behind the shelf. Just for a second. He couldn't describe it clearly, just that it was low to the ground, bent in a way that didn't look right, like it was folded in half but still moving. He said he saw a hand-long pale fingers touch the floor before the thing slipped into the shadows behind the wall. He didn't sound sure of what he saw, but he also wasn't smiling. We didn't go to the bonfire that night. Stayed in my room instead. We put on a movie, half-watched it, barely talked. It was like we both agreed without saying anything, that the less we said, the better. The energy was just off. Around 2 in the morning, we both heard it. 3 knocks. Not on the door. On the wall. My bedroom wall. The one facing the backyard. There's nothing on that side but the drop-off toward the hill and a row of bushes. No porch, no walkway, just siding and air. But there they were. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Spaced out. Heavy, like someone using the flat of their hand. Not a branch tapping. Not an animal. A knock. We didn't move. Just sat up straight in our sleeping bags, listening. It didn't happen again. We kept the lights on and didn't even pretend to sleep. I remember sitting there, staring at the base of the wall like I could see through it. Nothing ever came back, but we didn't relax. Silas left the next morning before breakfast. Said he had a headache. He didn't even finish his coffee. We didn't talk about the knock, not then. I think we both just wanted to drop it, move on. Let it fade like a bad dream you don't want to say out loud because it might make it real. There were 4 of us. That Halloween me, Brant, Caleb, and Macy. We decided to do something different that year, something that didn't involve crowded bars or awkward costumes or the same overplayed horror movies. Brant had found this listing for a cheap rental near a place called Ashmore Ridge. The map showed scattered clearings and what looked like abandoned cabins deep in the woods, way off any known trail. No roads led to them, no hiking paths even came close. It looked like someone had tried to build something out there and then just stopped. Half-built cabins, collapsed roofs, forgotten stone foundations covered in moss. He called it Ashmore's Forgotten Patchwork. He was weirdly proud of that name. The plan was to hike out in the early afternoon, reach the biggest structure before dark, hang out, take some creepy photos, and then hike back before midnight. Caleb brought his DSLR, Brant packed headlamps, and Macy brought a thermos of something she called campfire cider, which was mostly whiskey. I didn't bring much. I was mostly there for the laughs. It didn't feel like a big deal at first. There wasn't really a trail, just some old fence lines and half-faded animal tracks. We followed what used to be a railroad cut, now mostly swallowed by brush. For the first hour or so, it was just us being idiots in the woods. Caleb complaining about a blister, Macy trying to make spooky forest jokes, and getting annoyed when no one laughed. Brant kept pulling out his phone to check our position on that grainy old satellite map he had saved. Honestly, the whole thing felt like a harmless detour, the kind of thing you do in college and vaguely forget about years later. But then we hit the stream. It wasn't especially wide, but it was cold and glassy and unnervingly still. We crossed it single file, stepping on slick rocks. On the other side was the first clearing, and right there in the center of it was a stump. Nothing dramatic about the stump itself, but on top of it was this neat little pile of bones, stripped clean, arranged in a kind of spiral pattern. There was something too precise about it, like it had been done on purpose, not just by animals. Around the stump was a loose ring of flattened aluminum cans, some beer, some what looked like old preserved food. No labels anymore, just rust and dents. Macy crouched down and said it looked like someone had made a fire circle, but there weren't any ashes, no charcoal, just dead moss and this faint metallic smell in the air like old blood or iron pipes. We didn't linger. No one said anything really, just some awkward glances, and then we moved on. The hike started to feel different after that. The woods felt denser somehow, not darker exactly, just harder to move through, like the trees were leaning in closer. Or maybe that was just in my head. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was gone. We hadn't realized how quickly the light had disappeared until we were standing in front of it, squinting through dusk at this lopsided structure half swallowed by the trees. It wasn't really a cabin anymore, just the rotted skeleton of one. The roof sagged in the middle like something massive had sat on it. There were window holes but no glass. The door hung open, crooked on a single hinge, just swinging slightly, even though there wasn't any wind. Brant went in first, of course. He always had to be first. Caleb followed, then Macy. I hesitated. I don't even know why. Just stood there, one foot on the threshold, staring into the dark. Inside, everything felt off, not just abandoned, not just old, wrong. The floor sloped in multiple directions. Not one steady tilt, more like waves frozen in wood. Every step we took made the floor creak, but not like normal wood creaks. The sound was too deep, too echoey, like it was coming from a crawl space or cellar below us. I asked if there was a basement. No one answered. The walls were covered in carvings. Some were crosses, others looked like circles, and there was one repeated symbol that stood out. A jagged tree shape, like someone had tried to draw pine needles using only broken glass. It was everywhere, like someone had carved it hundreds of times until their hand cramped. There was a hole at the far end of the room, just a rectangle cut into the floorboards. It was the exact size and shape of a coffin lid. No one pointed it out. We all saw it. We all avoided it. There wasn't any furniture, just a stack of wooden frames leaning in a dusty corner. No pictures, no canvas or backing, just bare frames, some of them cracked, some of them tied together with wire. Macy said the air tasted weird, bitter, like sucking on a penny. Caleb was standing near the center of the room and suddenly stepped back, quick. Said he felt something breathe against his ankle, like a gust of warm air. But there was no vent, no hole, just the floor. We should have left then. We all felt it, that instinct. But Brant noticed a rope hanging from the ceiling. It led to a low attic hatch. He tugged it and the wood groaned as the door opened, and then something upstairs moved. Not a creak or shuffle, a thump, like something heavy dropping to all fours. Brant looked up and climbed the ladder. He was gone less than a minute. When he came back down, he looked like he'd been underwater, just pale and blank. He didn't say anything at first, just kept looking at each of us. Then at the hole in the floor, finally he said, "There's a chair, nailed to the beam, and bundles hanging upside down." That was all he gave us. Caleb went up next. Against all reason, Macy begged him not to. He came down slower. "There's something in them," he said. "They're moving." They weren't bags, not really. More like tight cloth pouches, each one about the size of a forearm, strung up with twine. They weren't swaying, they were twitching, like something was trying to push out from the inside, over and over. No one else went up. And then we heard humming, coming from under the floor, from below the hole. We all turned at the same time, and we backed out. No running, no screaming, just quiet, slow steps. Like if we made a sound, something would answer. Outside, the air was dead still. Even the insects had stopped. The woods were holding their breath. Halfway back, Caleb stopped. "Did any of you count the bundles?" he asked. We shook our heads. He said he did. Said there were 4. Then he took out his phone and scrolled through the photos he'd taken inside. Most were blurry, but one was clear. The attic, the chair, the bundles. One of them had fallen to the floor. We didn't talk the rest of the way back. Sometimes I thought I could hear the humming behind us, but it faded, and I told myself it was just the wind returning. We made it back to the lodge. Didn't even take our shoes off. Just sat in the living room staring at nothing. Macy poured what was left of her cider and drank it straight from the thermos. Brant was pacing. Caleb was deleting the photos. No one said, "Let's never talk about this." We just didn't. A week later, Brant stopped replying to texts. A month after that, Macy transferred to another school, out west somewhere. Caleb deleted his social media and changed numbers. Last I heard, he was living off the grid in Idaho. My name's Kyle, and I was 25 when Darren dared us to hike up to the ridge. It was one of those long Halloween weekends. 3 days off, no plans, just boredom and a weird energy hanging around. We were all crashing at this old rental house near Granger Hollow. Darren, who always had to be the one making things interesting, brought up the cabins the second night. "You ever heard of those places past the state line?" he asked, sitting around the fire pit in the backyard. "Used to be a hunting camp or something. Creepy as hell. No one goes near them anymore." I had. Sort of. When I was a kid, my uncle used to take us on drives through the hills, and we'd pass this barely visible trail with a wooden post stuck in the ground. No sign on it, just the post. If you squinted through the trees at just the right moment, you could catch the rooftops. 5 of them in a line, like someone started building something and gave up halfway. Locals avoided that area, not with drama or ghost stories, just avoidance. Like how you ignore a room in your house you don't use anymore. "They're still up there?" I asked. "Guess so," Darren said. "Thought we could check them out tomorrow." You know, do something. Lacey, his girlfriend, immediately shot him a look. "You're kidding, right?" Ricky was into it. His younger sister, Cammie, 13, sharp as a tack, was even more into it. She begged to come along, swore she'd be fine. I figured, sure. We'd hike up, poke around, kill a couple hours, be back before it got dark. So the next morning, we packed sandwiches, filled some water bottles, and headed out. The trail wasn't marked, but Darren had dropped a pin from some old forum post he'd found. Took us nearly 45 minutes just to locate the right entry point off a gravel service road. After that, it was uphill the whole way. Dry leaves crunching under our boots, wind pushing cold air through the branches. One of those days where the sun's out but doesn't do much. After about an hour, we saw the first roof. They looked just like I remembered. 5 small cabins in a row, each one identical in size and shape, single room, pitched roof, old chimneys crumbling apart. They weren't collapsing or anything, but they didn't look lived in either. Just suspended. Like someone hit pause, and that was the first thing that felt off. They should have been covered in debris, right? Overgrown. But the brush was trimmed back, and the front steps on each cabin were clear. No leaves, no branches. Like someone swept them that morning. Darren didn't hesitate. He marched straight to the nearest one and kicked the door open. I expected a cloud of dust or raccoons bolting out, but it was just quiet. Still air, bitterly cold inside. You could see his breath when he stepped in. Lacey stayed outside, arms crossed. She wasn't being dramatic, just tense, like her body was trying to warn her before her brain caught up. Ricky and I peeled off to check the second cabin. The door was already cracked open, so I nudged it with my foot. Inside, everything was covered in a layer of dust and pine needles. Except one thing. There was a rug in the center of the floor, perfectly flat. No dust, no folds. Like someone had just laid it out and smoothed it with their hands. I stepped closer. The window had a little tin ashtray on the sill. Inside were 2 cigarette butts. One of them barely burned, fresh almost. No ash ring, no smudge on the glass. I showed Ricky. He shrugged, said maybe some hikers use the place sometimes, but I didn't buy it. There were no footprints. Not even our own were sticking. The dust didn't move. That's when Darren called out from his cabin. "Yo, there's food in here. Like canned food. Bedding too." "Boots under the cot." He sounded too excited. His voice echoed strange, like it wasn't bouncing off the walls so much as getting pulled in by them. Then Cammy called over, calm as anything. "There's a man in that one." She was standing near the 5th cabin, pointing at the window. I asked her what she meant. She said, "There's a man sitting on the bed. He's watching. No panic. It won." Just a statement. Darren ran over, dragging Lacey with him. I followed. The rest caught up a second later. We searched the place top to bottom. Empty. But something had changed. From that moment on, it felt like we weren't alone. Darren said we should stick together and open each cabin one by one. Said he wanted to document everything on his phone. Like this was suddenly a project. Lacey didn't look like she was on board. She kept glancing over her shoulder, biting her nails. Not just spooked, more like she expected someone to be inches behind her at any given moment. We got through the 3rd cabin. Same setup, cot, stove, basic shelf, no personal stuff. 4th one was similar, but that's where things started sliding sideways. Cammy came up beside me, tugged my hoodie and asked, "Why is that man pretending to be Ricky?" She pointed toward the open doorway of the last cabin. There was someone standing inside, way in the back. Same red flannel Ricky was wearing, same way he stands, feet apart, head slightly tilted. But Ricky was right next to me. I stared at the figure. It turned, slowly, then walked into the far corner of the cabin and vanished behind a wall. Darren and I rushed in. Cold air hit us like we stepped into a fridge. There was no one inside. Just a made-up cot, stove, and the back door wide open, creaking in the wind. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the figure moved. Too fluid, too casual, like it knew how to be Ricky, but didn't know how to feel like him. That's when Lacey cracked. She kept repeating that something was wrong with the woods, that they sounded different, that everything felt shifted. Ricky patted his back pocket and stopped cold. His phone was gone. He swore it was there. Said he'd been recording on and off the whole time. He turned back, retracing his steps. We stayed put. None of us wanted to split up again, but Darren insisted we wait by the trail. 5 minutes, nothing. Then Darren went after him, said he wouldn't go far. So now it was just me, Lacey, and Cammy. Lacey looked like she was shutting down, rocking slightly on her heels. Cammy sat on a rock, staring up at the cabins like she was trying to memorize every detail in case they disappeared. Then, 20 minutes later, they came back, Darren and Ricky, walking out of the fifth cabin side by side, same pace, same posture, same blank expression. Something in my chest dropped. It wasn't just the way they moved. It was how synchronized they were, like someone had mirrored them. I called Ricky's name, nothing. Called Darren's, sing. They turned their heads in perfect sync. Their eyes looked off, not unfocused, just too focused, like they were looking past us or through us. Cammy stepped beside me and whispered, "Those aren't them, not scared, just sure." And once she said it, I saw it too. I grabbed Lacey's hand and told them we were leaving, right now. We turned and started back down the trail, fast but not running. I didn't want to see what happened if we ran. About 5 minutes down, we spotted someone sitting on a log just off the path. It was Ricky, the real one. He looked up, squinting, said he'd followed a trail behind the third cabin that curved around and brought him back. When he returned, nobody was there. I asked about Darren. He hadn't seen him. We somehow dragged Cammy and Lacey down the hill, but never found Darren. It started out like one of those last-minute plans that sounds fun in a group chat, but feels less smart once you're actually doing it. The town had its usual haunted hayride and discount bin costumes, but my friend Mira found something online that seemed way more interesting. She said there were some abandoned hunting cabins way out in the woods past Briar Ridge. 4 of us decided to go: Mira, her boyfriend Theo, this girl Jess who was visiting from Asheville for the weekend, and me. I grew up maybe 20 minutes from that patch of forest and had never even heard of those cabins, which honestly made me want to see them more. We packed flashlights, a thermos of cider, one of those old Polaroid cameras. No costumes. The whole plan was to hike in before dark, explore a bit, grab a few creepy photos, and hike back out before it got too cold. We left the car on the side of a gravel pull-off and started walking along what looked like an old fire access trail. Took longer than we thought, almost 2 hours winding up and down hills. But Mira's directions were weirdly accurate, and right before dusk, we found this clearing. 3 cabins, all in a line, facing what used to be a fire pit. They looked like they were just dropped there and then forgotten. The wood was bloated and soft in places, but they were still standing. The middle one had a door hanging sideways off the hinges, and all the windows were just empty frames. Naturally, that's the one we went into first. The inside smelled like wet wood and something sharp, like mildew mixed with pine sap. One table with a busted leg, a cracked old lantern, a few piles of what looked like squirrel nests in the corners. Pretty standard abandoned cabin stuff. Mira was already snapping pictures. Theo was goofing off, rattling a shelf behind Jess to freak her out. I hung close to the door because the floor gave under your feet like it was hiding a swamp underneath. Then Theo found this notebook. It was wedged into a gap in the wall near the back, water damaged but still mostly intact. The first part looked like a hunting log, dates, weather notes, a few names. Pretty boring. Then halfway through, the handwriting started slanting and things got off. The dates stopped making sense. One said October 20 of 1990. The next one just said, still night. After that, it was mostly short phrases, random words, a few pages of symbols, and then just scratch marks, like someone dragging the tip of a knife across the paper again and again. Theo laughed and chucked it onto the table like he was done with the spooky part of the evening. Right then, we all heard something move. Not footsteps, more like a slow shifting weight, like something heavy adjusting on a sagging floorboard. It came from one of the other cabins. Jess whispered something about a raccoon. Theo nodded like, yeah, sure, probably a raccoon. But no one moved. We just stood there, ears straining, waiting. After a minute, it stopped. We forced a few laughs and moved on to the second cabin. This one had bunk beds and some old coat hooks along the wall. But the air inside was different. Not colder like the temperature dropped, colder like something ignored the air around it. The windows were boarded up, but light still felt like it didn't want to go in. Mira crouched next to one of the bunks and pointed out a pair of gloves stuck underneath. They were small, like child-sized, dark with mold or something worse. She picked them up, but only for a second, dropped them like they burned. No one said anything, but we were all thinking the same thing. The fun was gone. Something about this place had turned. We figured we'd check the last cabin and then head back. It was locked up with an old padlock, rusted but still clinging to the hasp. Jess gave the door one solid kick, and the whole frame just shuddered. It didn't budge. That felt like a sign, so we turned around. Except the trail was gone. Not faded. Not hard to see. Gone. The hillside behind the cabins didn't look like the one we came down. The ridge line had vanished. The trees looked packed tighter than before, like they'd grown closer while we weren't watching. We walked the edge of the clearing twice. Nothing looked familiar. Theo pulled out his phone. No signal. Same with mine. I said we should wait for the moon and try to retrace our steps by the light. Jess started getting worked up, fast talking, saying we shouldn't have taken the notebook. She wanted to put it back. Mira was already on it. She walked back into the first cabin holding the notebook with both hands like it might fall apart. I followed her in. She slid it back into the wall, exactly where it had come from. Right then, we heard a long creak like something heavy slowly shifting its weight. Then a dull thud. Outside, Theo and Jess were frozen, staring at the third cabin. The locked one. The padlock was lying in the grass. The door was open, maybe an inch. We hadn't touched it. None of us had even gone near it since Jess tried to kick it. We all just stared. Then the tapping started. From inside the third cabin, something began to tap against the door frame. Not a knock. Not like a hand. Not like a hand. It sounded sharp, like bones or claws or maybe even nails. 3 quick taps, then one slow. Then silence. Then the pattern again. Same rhythm. Same pause. Jess was gone before I even realized she'd moved. Took off into the trees like her body made the decision before her brain could catch up. Theo shouted after her and went running. That left Mira and me just standing there. Neither of us said a word. The tapping kept going, then it stopped, and from the woods, Jess screamed. One sharp sound, then nothing. I called her name, but it came back weird. Distorted, like someone had stretched it out and played it backward. Mira grabbed my arm. Her voice was flat when she said she saw something past the cabins, behind the trees. Said it looked human, but wasn't. We just ran. Not toward a trail, just away. Away from the third cabin, from that sound, from whatever had opened that locked door. We crashed through underbrush, snapped branches, slipped down slopes. Mira tripped and slid down a steep patch of dirt. I followed, landed hard next to her, and suddenly we were on a dirt road. Not the one we came in on. But it was a road, and it was real, and we followed it until it hit pavement. A pickup truck passed around midnight. They stopped, thank God. Took us to a gas station 10 miles out. We filed a missing person report for Jess. Search teams went out for about a week. Dogs, drones, even helicopters. Nothing. It just swallowed her. No one talks about those cabins anymore. This year, I stayed home for Halloween. No pumpkins, no porch lights, nothing. I didn't even hand out candy. I was 29 when Halloween fell on a Monday that year. By Monday, everything had fizzled out. Group chats were quiet. Some guy posted vague directions to 3 abandoned cabins deep in the hills past Shepherd's Bend. He said they'd been built sometime before the Depression and left to rot sometime after, way out where nobody bothers to log anymore. I don't know why it stuck with me. It wasn't about chasing ghosts or scaring myself. I'm not really that kind of guy. I grew up in northern Kentucky. That Appalachian pull is real. Those rotting houses and silent hills hit some part of you that never really goes away. I've hiked trails just to look at a rusted gate or the foundation of a church someone forgot to tear down. It's not spooky. It's more like curious sadness. Anyway, I figured if I was ever going to try and find those cabins, Halloween was as good a day as any. Felt fitting. Everyone else was sleeping off cheap tequila. I wanted something quieter. I drove out past Greeley, into the hills, took back roads until pavement turned to gravel and gravel turned into weeds. I parked where the road just kind of disappeared into grass and brush. There was a gap in the trees where the trail supposedly started, if you could call it a trail. It looked more like someone had driven a four-wheeler through it maybe 10 years ago and never again. I had a flashlight, a flare, my old multi-tool, and my phone in airplane mode. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not out of secrecy. I just didn't think I'd be out that long. I figured I'd find some moldy cabins, poke around, take a picture or two, and be back at the car by late afternoon. The trail was a steady climb at first. Quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No crunch of squirrels in the underbrush. Just the occasional breeze and the sound of my boots pressing into the softened pine needles. The farther I went, the less sure I was that I was even on a trail. The trees leaned in close, and the ground stopped pretending to have direction. But about 40 minutes in, I saw the first cabin. Then the second. Then the third. They were all clustered in a clearing shaped, kind of like a triangle. The two in the back were mostly collapsed, roofs sunken in, walls caving around tree trunks. But the third, right at the front, still stood, leaning a little, like a drunk trying to look sober but intact. I did a slow circle of the clearing. It didn't feel haunted or cursed, just forgotten. Then I saw the fire pit. It was maybe 10 feet out from the good cabin, just a circle of medium-sized stones, but they weren't buried in leaves like everything else around. They weren't freshly placed either, just clean, like someone had brushed them off not that long ago. I kept walking. That's when I spotted the boot print in the mud by the porch. Bigger than mine, deeper. The edges were softened by time, but not by much. I hadn't seen another car on the drive-in. I didn't like that. The door was swollen from moisture, but it opened if you leaned your shoulder into it. Inside, the air was thick with mold and old smoke. Not terrible, just stale and sour in that way. Damp wood always is. There was a cot in the corner, some shelves with broken mason jars, and a tiny cast-iron stove that looked like it hadn't held a fire in decades. But then, I looked at the floor. 5 boards near the stove didn't match the rest. They ran crosswise, like they'd been replaced. And the wood looked cleaner. Not clean, just less rotten. Like it had been pulled up more recently than anything else in the room. I crouched and used the flat of my multi-tool to pry one up. Beneath was a small root cellar. No ladder, no stairs. Just a rectangular hole lined with stones and filled with darkness. It smelled deeper than the room, if that makes sense. Cold, earthy, and still. That's when I heard the first sound. Not from the cellar, from outside. It was slow, a dragging noise, not footsteps. Not an animal, something big being pulled across wet leaves. Long strokes, unhurried. I killed the flashlight and dropped into a crouch near the window. At first, I saw nothing, just trees. Then something moved between them. It wasn't that far away, but the trees made it hard to get a good look. Still, even from that distance, I knew something was wrong. The shape was all off, too tall, arms too long, posture too loose. No coat, no hat, nothing to explain the way it held itself, like it wasn't built right. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then came a second sound, lighter, faster, footsteps, but not upright. It sounded like something moving on all fours. I stayed still for what felt like 20 minutes. Could have been 5, could have been 1. Nothing moved. No more sounds. I clicked the flashlight back on and looked back down into the cellar. That's when I noticed the carvings. On the inside of the trapdoor, lining the edge, tally marks, dozens, maybe hundreds. Deep gouges, some overlapping, some spaced out. Some looked like they'd been made slowly. Others were ragged, desperate, like someone had spent a long time down there with nothing else to do. I felt my chest start to tighten, that itchy, slow panic that starts in your ribs and spreads. I lowered the board back down, didn't nail it shut, just closed it and backed away. That's when I felt the breath. One single exhale, cold, right at the base of my neck. I spun so fast I nearly lost my footing. Nothing there, just a corner of the room and the stove. I bolted. No thought. No thought. Just movement. Straight out the door into the woods. Everything looked darker now. Not late in the day, dark, just heavier. The space itself felt thicker. Every tree trunk looked like it was holding something behind it. I walked fast. No stopping. No checking behind me. I picked up the pace and kept going until something felt wrong again. I was back in the clearing. The cabins were there. Exactly as before. I hadn't turned. Hadn't taken any fork. There was no fork. But I was standing in the same clearing like I'd never left. And the cabin door, the one I'd left open, was now shut. I didn't close it. Then I heard the dragging sound again. This time closer. That was it. I broke into a full sprint. Off trail, through brush and branches and every awful thing that could slow me down. I didn't care what I stepped on or what cut me. I just needed to get away from that place. The woods didn't make it easy. Everything felt angled to trip me or slow me down. But after what felt like miles, I broke through the trees. There was my car, exactly where I'd left it. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine. Then the headlights lit up the trees ahead. Something stood between them, tall, motionless. It wasn't walking this time, just standing. Arms too long, torso too narrow. But now I could see the texture of it. It wasn't skin, it looked like bark. Rough and stretched over joints in the wrong places. Too smooth in some parts, cracked and split in others. The eyes were just holes, black and bottomless, like someone had scooped them out and never filled them back in. It leaned forward, just a little, like it was trying to place me. Then it didn't move at all. I drove, fast, didn't look back. Didn't breathe properly until I hit the gas station out by Route 32. I didn't even stop for gas. Just pulled into the lot and sat there gripping the wheel. A guy came out to smoke. Late 50s, flannel jacket, the usual. He saw me and said, "You okay?" I told him just a little. Not the full thing. Not the cellar or the circles or the breath. Just the surface level weirdness. He squinted at me for a second. "You were out by Lorne Hollow?" I nodded. He spat. "You picked a hell of a night." Then he went inside. That was it. Later, I tried to look the place up. Lorne Hollow, Burnt Hollow, whatever the real name is. There's not much, just a few dead links, some map scans, one thread with no replies. No legend, no creepy stories. We were out past Hollow Ridge, somewhere near the Kentucky-West Virginia line, off an old service road that felt more like a dried-up creek bed than anything man-made. Ellis was the one who got the idea in our heads. He'd heard about some abandoned mining camp buried deep in the woods, untouched since the 70s. Halloween landed on a Sunday that year, and none of us were in the mood for another round of overpriced bar crawls or the same parties at the same houses with the same people in the same costumes. So we packed some beer, flashlights, sleeping bags, and a thermal camera that Ellis borrowed from work at the plant. There were 5 of us that night: me, Ellis, Sean, Bree, and Tyler. We'd all grown up in different towns scattered around the border. Nothing big, nothing fancy, but we'd ended up circling the same friend group over the years. Ellis had this rust-red Jeep that looked like it had never seen a car wash, and somehow it got us close. Maybe a mile and a half from the spot marked on his crumpled printout. After that, the path gave out completely, and we had to hike. The trail wasn't really a trail, just a series of faint impressions in the ground, mostly covered by roots and brambles. We climbed through narrow clearings and over half-frozen creeks, the kind where the water skims under a thin layer of brittle ice. Most of the trees were already bare by then, but the ground still had a thick layer of leaf mush, and the underbrush was stubborn as hell. I must have tripped a dozen times, and Bree kept swearing every time thorns caught her hoodie. Just before the sun dipped low, we stumbled onto the first structure, or what was left of it. It looked more like a collapsed pile of barnwood and rusted tin than anything resembling a cabin. Ellis was squinting at his map, looking confused, until Sean spotted more rooftops up the ridge. That's when we saw them. 7 or maybe 8 cabins, spaced unevenly along what used to be a gravel road, now more moss and root than stone. The cabins were in different stages of falling apart. One had its entire side missing, like a dollhouse left open. Another leaned hard to the right, just clinging to its foundation out of stubbornness. But a few were still mostly intact. Real roofs, solid walls. Doors that hung crooked but held. The whole layout looked like someone had tried to build a little village, then walked away and let the forest slowly eat it. We picked the one closest to what Ellis thought used to be the mess hall. The door was splintered off its hinges, but the inside wasn't half as bad as we'd expected. There was some trash, maybe from other hikers or drunk teenagers, and rat droppings in the corners, but no dead animals or mold or anything truly disgusting. It even smelled dry. Not clean, exactly, just dried out. Like the air inside had been sealed up for a long time. We tossed our stuff inside, cracked open some beers, and lit a couple lanterns we brought. Sean started up with his usual nonsense fake ghost stories and dumb impressions, and we all joined in, half listening, half scanning the woods through the cabin's broken windows. You could tell everyone was keyed up, even though we were pretending not to be. It was just after 9 when Ellis pulled out the thermal camera. I remember because we'd just finished the second round of stories, and Bree had made this sarcastic joke about ghost raccoons. Ellis handed the camera to Tyler first, telling him to aim it toward the woods behind the cabins, just to see if any wildlife popped up. We all took turns pointing it into the trees, zooming in on blobs that looked like deer or maybe possums. It was fun, in a dumb way, until it wasn't. The screen flashed white. Not fuzzy or glitchy, just pure, solid white, like someone had cranked the heat signature up to 100. Ellis, who'd just taken the camera back, stopped mid-sentence. He lowered it slowly, frowned, then looked through it again. "There's something out there," he said, so quiet we barely heard him. We all leaned in. The screen showed a shape upright, tall, standing way back in the tree line. Too far to make out detail, but the silhouette was wrong. Not glowing like a person would, just bright. Bright against the cold blue and green of the forest. Like whatever it was gave off its own heat. Sean muttered something about it being a weird tree. "Trees don't move," Ellis said flatly. And it did move. Just a little. A subtle shift left, like it was repositioning behind a trunk. We all spilled outside like idiots, flashlights swinging, calling out to nothing. It felt colder out there, like the air had dropped a few degrees since we'd first arrived. We aimed our lights at the exact spot where the shape had been, but there was nothing. No footprints. No sounds. Just the slow creak of trees swaying and the occasional rustle of dry leaves. After a few minutes, Bree said she felt dizzy and went back inside. The rest of us weren't far behind her. Inside, the mood shifted. We weren't joking anymore. We sat against the cabin walls, backs pressed to the wood, each of us covering a different window. Ellis kept the thermal camera going, but whatever we'd seen was gone. The air felt heavier though, not just quiet, but thick, like we were waiting for something to start. And then we heard it. Not footsteps, not exactly. More like pressure, like weight easing down onto the roof. I remember looking at Sean, and he looked back at me, both of us wide-eyed. The ceiling creaked. Not loud at first, just one sound, slow and steady, like wood adjusting to cold air, then another, closer, like something was crawling or pacing up there. The roof wasn't tall. No attic, no insulation, just exposed beams, a few rotten shingles. Anything up there would have had to be light or very careful not to crash through. Tyler whispered, "It's on the roof." We all froze. Even the wind seemed to die outside. Then came another creak, this one sharp, almost like the beam had buckled under a step. Whatever was above us wasn't small. It moved in a slow, deliberate loop from one end of the roof to the other, then paused, then again, same pattern. Sean reached for the door, probably ready to bolt, but the second he touched it, something slammed down on the roof, hard, dead center. It was a kind of sound that goes through your chest, like someone dropped a boulder from 10 feet up. The whole structure shook. Dust rained down. Bree screamed. Tyler fumbled his phone, but there was no signal, not even one bar. Then, nothing. Then, just like that, it was over. The sound, the weight, the pressure, it all lifted in a single instant. We waited. 5 minutes. 10, long enough for our breathing to get shallow again. Ellis handed me the thermal and nodded toward the door. I didn't want to, but I stepped forward, holding it steady. At the far end of the gravel path, between the cabins, something was standing, not moving, just watching. The shape was wrong again, too tall, and the heat signature, it was brighter than before, like it was pulsing, like there was something burning inside it. I didn't say anything at first, just handed the camera back. "We need to go," I said. No one argued. We waited a few more minutes, then packed up what we could and stepped out together, lights up. The figure was gone. We didn't run, but we moved fast. The path back to the Jeep felt longer, colder. None of us spoke. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced something was there, not following us, just keeping pace. Far enough that we never caught it. It took almost an hour to get back to the Jeep. Ellis won't even mention it anymore. Bree moved out to Colorado a few months later. Tyler deleted the thermal footage. Every Halloween since we were kids, my cousins and I had this dumb tradition where we dared each other to explore the creepiest, most out-of-the-way places we could dig up. Not the commercial haunted houses or fake cornfield setups. Real places. Weird places. One year, it was a half-collapsed barn outside of Winfield that someone swore had a dirt floor full of bones. Another time, it was a drain tunnel that ran under the interstate. That one ended with Dylan throwing up because the smell turned out to be a dead possum wedged behind a grate. So, when our usual haunted corn maze got shut down that year, we were all pretty restless. Needed a new fix. Reese stepped up with the idea. Said he'd heard about these old hunting cabins way out in the hills near Norton, supposedly abandoned since the late 70s, after a gas leak killed a group of out-of-town hunters one night. They never tore them down, he told us, like it was some secret. Just left them to rot. The way he described it, they weren't even on the maps anymore, just forgotten. Overgrown. The perfect kind of stupid idea we thrived on. That Halloween night, it was the 5 of us. Me, Reese, Jory, Dylan, and Becca. Becca wasn't technically family, but we'd known her forever, and she was always the first one to say yes to stuff like this. She showed up wearing a thrifted army jacket and carrying one of those yellow disposable cameras. Said it felt more legit that way. We left around 8, packed light. A couple headlamps, 2 flashlights, some gloves, and a thermos full of hot cider that Becca had hit with way more rum than any of us expected. Dylan kept coughing every time he took a sip but wouldn't hand it back. We parked on a gravel shoulder past the last forestry gate, where the trees started thickening. The gate was chained but rusted enough that we got it loose without much effort. Past that, the road just turned into a rutted path that we followed on foot. The moon was out, kind of, but barely made it through the canopy. Everything was all branches and dry leaves, and that soft rustling that never seems to come from the direction you expect. The hike in took about 40 minutes, maybe a little more. Nobody really talked. Just the crunch of boots and the occasional muttered joke from Dylan to keep things from feeling too serious. When we finally saw the cabins, they looked like something from a forgotten part of a movie. 3 of them, all in a row, but uneven-like. They were built to stay out of each other's business. Single-room shacks with sagging roofs and moss climbing through every crack. They were worse off than Reese described. One of them didn't even have a full roof anymore, just beams like a ribcage sticking into the sky. Reese dared Jory to go in first because of course he did. Jory just rolled his eyes and stepped through the doorway of the nearest one like he'd been rehearsing it. Becca followed him with the camera, snapping a picture before her boots even hit the threshold. Flash went off. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. 2 rotted cots, a half-buried stove that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, piles of dried leaves, some animal droppings, maybe rat or squirrel. You could smell the mildew even from outside. While they poked around in there, I wandered toward the second cabin. Dylan was crouched by what looked like an old fire pit out front, muttering about bone piles, like he was narrating his own creepy documentary. The second cabin had a different feel to it, even from the outside. The air coming out of it was colder, and it smelled. Not like the first one. This wasn't just mold or old wood. It had this sharp, metallic edge to it, like wet coins or raw meat. I stepped in anyway. The floor creaked hard under my foot, real soft spots near the entrance. There was a stack of firewood in the corner that didn't match the rest of the room. It wasn't rotted or damp or even dusty. Looked like it had been chopped last week. In the back, something under a tarp. I didn't get close. That's when Reese showed up behind me. He didn't say anything at first, just looked around with this quiet, squinty expression like he was reading something on the walls. Then he pointed up. "Check that out," he said. "Symbols. Carved into the ceiling beams. Deep, deliberate marks. Not words. Nothing you could Google. Circles intersecting. Lines that branched off like veins or tree roots. Probably just bored kids," I said, trying to freak people out. He didn't respond. When I turned to look at him, he wasn't looking at the ceiling anymore. He was staring at the tarp. I hadn't heard him move. Then Becca screamed. Loud, short, sharp enough to snap us both into a sprint. We ran out of the cabin, expecting, honestly, I don't know what. A raccoon? A twisted ankle? But she was just standing there, frozen in front of the third cabin, camera hanging loose in one hand. "There's someone inside," she said. No one moved right away. Then we all crowded around trying to see. Reese raised the flashlight and swept it through the doorway. Nothing. Empty cabin. Just a wooden chair right in the center of the room. No dust, no clutter. Looked like someone had wiped it down with bleach. Dylan stepped in, took about 3 steps, then stopped. "Guys, is it just me? Or then..." He turned around. Only it wasn't Dylan. It had his jacket, the same tear on the right sleeve from where he caught it last week on a fence. Same hair, same everything. Except for the mouth. The way it moved wasn't right. Like it was trying out the idea of talking, remembering how lips were supposed to work. "Guys, is it just me? Or..." Same tone. Same rhythm. I turned to my left. Dylan was still beside me. He hadn't moved. We ran. Becca dropped the camera. Reese tripped and hit the dirt hard but got back up without a word. Nobody screamed, which somehow made it worse. The thing in the doorway didn't chase us, just watched. Tilted its head, like it was curious why we weren't doing what it expected. We got back to the car in maybe 15 minutes, all out of breath and not saying much. No one argued about who was driving. We just wanted out. As we turned onto the main road, I looked back one last time. The woods behind us looked empty, and somehow that was worse than seeing something standing there. The next morning, Becca called me. She'd gone back, alone. I told her not to, begged her not to actually, but she said she couldn't stop thinking about the pictures, about the thing in the doorway. Said she needed to see it in daylight. She found the camera. She got the photos developed at some pharmacy in town, called me as soon as she saw them. They weren't right. The first few were just what we expected. Trees, flash glare, the cots, the stove. But then, we were in the frames, all of us. Even in pictures we weren't there for. In the first photo, the one Becca took inside the first cabin while she was alone, there we were, in the background. All 5 of us, just standing there. In another, I was in the middle of the room, facing the camera, my mouth just starting to open. She swore up and down that none of us were in those rooms yet. After that, we didn't hang out much. Nobody said anything about what happened. We didn't fight, just stopped texting. I moved to Louisville the next month. Got a job, found an apartment, stopped checking the group chat. That Halloween, we were staying at my great-uncle's place in a town called Auburn Hollow, a small patch of nowhere up near the West Virginia line. His house was one of those old, low-slung places tucked against the bottom of a ridge, with woods so thick behind it you couldn't see past the first few rows of trees, even in daylight. Every fall, we'd come up for a few days. Me, my mom, my cousins, sometimes their parents too. It was tradition. Cold nights, hot cider, the occasional backyard bonfire. Pretty harmless stuff. But that year felt a little off before we even got there. Not for any big reason, just small things. My mom kept mentioning how she didn't sleep well in the house anymore. Said she always felt like she was forgetting something. The living room clock stopped working 3 times that week and somehow kept resetting itself to the exact same wrong time, 3:17. And when we pulled up to the driveway that Friday afternoon, the porch light was already on, even though no one had been home for 2 days. Stuff you can explain if you try hard enough. That night after dinner, Rob got that look in his eye. He always had ideas when we visited. Harmless mischief most of the time, but this one was different. "There's cabins up there," he said casually, nodding toward the ridge. "Real old ones. Hunters used to use them in the 60s, maybe 70s. Haven't been touched in decades." His sister June rolled her eyes. "You said that last year." "Yeah, but I found one," he said. "A couple weeks ago. There's more too." I didn't go far. Of course, he didn't tell anyone about it until the exact moment it got dark. It was about 7 when we headed out. The moon was up and almost full, casting enough light to make out shapes in the woods, but not enough to feel comfortable. The trail started behind the shed, just a narrow break in the undergrowth you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. Rob had his phone flashlight on, but the beam was more glare than help. June walked behind him, arms crossed, and I followed last, keeping my hood up against the wind. We didn't talk much, just boots scraping over roots and the dry rustle of leaves brushing our legs. The air was cold enough to sting a little but not freezing. The trail curved uphill and narrowed, and about 20 minutes in, we ducked under a sagging barbed wire fence. Looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The barbs were red with rust and bent in all directions, like the fence gave up trying to hold anything out. Once we were past it, the trees started to space out. Rob stopped and pointed ahead. "There," he said. "See that roof line?" It was barely visible through the trees, just a sagging peak of wood tucked into the brush. When we got closer, I could see that the cabin was small and low to the ground, maybe 1 room total. The porch was a wreck. The railing had collapsed, and the boards creaked under our weight when we stepped up. June pushed open the door, or what was left of it. It was lying against the wall, almost like someone had removed it and propped it there on purpose. Inside, the place was dusty and stale, the kind of smell that sits on your tongue. The walls were stained with water lines, and the floor was covered in dirt and old paper. I could see part of a rotted chair in the corner, and what might have been a wood stove, long since rusted through. We poked around a bit, then spotted another structure behind it, smaller, partially hidden by a collapsed tree. It barely looked like a cabin anymore, just a box of wood with a gaping hole in the roof and weeds crawling through the doorframe. Rob stayed by the first one while June and I made our way to the second. She crouched by the doorway and tilted her head. "There's clothes in here," she said, low and flat. I stepped next to her and looked. On the far side of the room, bunched up against the corner, was a flannel shirt rotted and clinging to itself in folds. Nearby was a single child sneaker. Not muddy, not shredded, just sitting there. I didn't see anything else that looked personal. No blankets, no bags. Just sticks, dead leaves, a couple long springs sticking out of what might have been a mattress a lifetime ago. Then Rob's voice floated down to us. "Hey, there's a third one down here." We climbed a steep incline behind the first 2 and saw it. It was different, newer somehow. No rot, no moss. The wood looked solid, the door was shut clean, and the windows had glass that wasn't cracked. The porch didn't sag, and there was no trash anywhere around it. It felt wrong. June stopped dead in her tracks. "I don't like that one," she said. Not scared, just sure. Rob kept walking. He gave us this grin like we were being dramatic. "Come on," he said. "You're acting like it's haunted." He stepped up, turned the knob, and pushed open the door. The inside was pure black. Not dim, just black, like someone had painted over the air. He walked in. We waited. We waited. A beat passed, then another. I thought I'd hear him walking, maybe muttering about how empty it was, but there was nothing. No creaking, no shifting, just silence. "Rob," I called, no answer. June moved closer to me but didn't say anything. I walked to the door frame and leaned in, just enough to call again. "Rob?" My voice didn't echo. It felt cut off, like the air in there was thicker. Then there was a knock, behind us. We both spun around. Nobody, just trees. A few skinny trunks and brush. Then another knock, softer but closer, from our left. Not on a tree, on something flat. But there was nothing flat out there. I backed up. "Okay, Rob, enough." Then he walked out. He looked exactly the same. No dirt, no scratches, calm, but off. His eyes didn't meet mine or June's. They stared past us like he was watching something behind us, or still thinking about whatever he saw inside. "What's wrong with you?" June asked, her voice tight. He blinked. "Nothing." I reached out. His jacket was cold, colder than the air around us. It made my hand pull back without thinking. "You heading back?" he asked. I said, "Yeah." He nodded, but he didn't move. We left him standing there. At the first cabin, I looked back up the hill. He was gone. We waited. 5 minutes, then 10. He never came down. June wanted to go back up, but something in me said no. Not because I was scared, because it felt like if we went back, we wouldn't come down either. We told my uncle. He grabbed his flashlight and went up alone. When he came back, he said the cabins were empty, all 2 of them. I asked him if he saw the third one, described it exactly. He stared at me for a second, then shook his head. "There's no third cabin up there. Never has been." Rob walked in the next morning, just wandered into the kitchen like he'd gone out for air. Same clothes, same boots. No scratches, no dirt. My uncle asked where he went. He shrugged. "Back up the trail. Thought you guys left." He didn't remember going inside anything but the first cabin. Said it was just junk and old chairs. Thought we went home early. Later that night, I checked my phone, just for something to do. There was a photo in my gallery I didn't remember taking. Black at first, but something was in the center. I brightened it. The third cabin, door wide open. Rob standing inside. Behind him, near the back wall, something else. Another figure, same height, same clothes. I deleted the photo, not out of panic. Just a quiet decision, like I'd cleaned up after something that shouldn't have happened. We had borrowed a beat-up old Chevy truck. Ray's uncle had left it in the garage after the engine started stalling, but it still ran well enough to get us where we wanted to go. We were rattling down this dirt road in the middle of nowhere, deep in the Appalachian woods. I don't even know if road is the right word. It looked more like an old hunting trail someone had driven over a few times, just enough to flatten a path through the trees. Every few seconds, the truck would hit a rock or dip and jolt us all hard enough to make Lila swear. It was Halloween night, and yeah, we'd made the dumb decision to go looking for old cabins. Not the kind you rent for a weekend, the kind that get buried in local legend and half-truths. We'd spent a few nights trawling obscure forums, Reddit threads, old blog archives, stuff people had written about black cabins or forgotten homes in Appalachia. Most of it was garbage. Stories that didn't even try to sound real, but one post linked to a digitized map from a regional archive, kind of an obscure one, not on any big state history site. That's where I found the pin. The cabin was listed in an old land survey from the early 1950s. I still remember what the file said: unsalvageable remote ridge, no viable access. Pretty dry. But next to that, in faint pencil, someone had written, "Leave it be." Of course we didn't. 2 of our friends, Harper and Chris, bailed at the last minute. Harper said she had a bad feeling. Chris just ghosted. So it ended up being me, Ray, and Lila. We drove until the road became too narrow and overgrown to push through. The underbrush was scraping the sides of the truck. Branches were tapping the windshield. So we parked near a wide tree stump and set off on foot. The hike wasn't long, but it was steep. It was one of those treks where you keep thinking the next rise will be the last, and then another slope appears just behind it. By the time we found the place, the sun had dipped low enough that everything was tinted with this dull orange glow. The cabin was partially sunken, as if one side had started giving in to the slope. Boards were missing from the roof. The front door hung off one hinge and moved slightly in the breeze. Lila pulled out her flashlight but didn't turn it on. "We're just looking," she said. "Quick in and out." Inside smelled like rot and wet stone. The floor had partially collapsed in one corner, like something heavy had fallen through. There was still some furniture. What was left of a bed frame, a cast iron stove, and a busted desk. On one wall, we noticed what looked like symbols scratched into the wood. Rough shapes, not immediately recognizable. No one said anything about them. Ray drifted toward the back. "There's another room through here," he called. I followed. Lila stayed in the main space. The back room felt more like a storage shed than a bedroom, narrow with empty wooden shelves and spider webs in the corners. The only things in the room were an overturned washtub and a wood-framed mirror hanging crooked near the corner. And the second I looked into that mirror, I knew something was off. Ray was beside me. I could see him clearly in real life. But in the mirror, his reflection wasn't facing me. It was turned toward the door, as if he was about to leave. I shifted a little to the side. His reflection didn't move with me. I grabbed his arm. "Stop moving." He turned. "I'm not." In the mirror, his double still stood frozen, staring at the doorway. Then, very slowly, it smiled. It wasn't Ray's normal smile. It was too calm, too deliberate. We both backed out of that room. Neither of us said anything. Lila was kneeling next to the desk, flipping through what looked like an old leather-bound notebook. The flashlight was finally on, its beam shaking a little as she held it. "You need to see this," she said. "These are logs. Like, whoever lived here, they kept track of stuff." I crouched down next to her and looked at the open page. The handwriting was a mess. Tight and sharp, not following the lines, spiraling inward in some places. I caught the date, October 31st, 1955. The last few lines burned into my memory. It doesn't stop. I hear the pacing every night now. It's mimicking again. That was all I read before Lila slammed the notebook shut and stood up. We didn't talk about staying. We just left. I thought the hike back would feel longer, but we were practically jogging. I remember thinking how dumb we'd been to get so freaked out. Probably just an old mirror warped by moisture. Probably just weird shadows. But then we came across something none of us remembered. Pinned to the side of a tree was what looked like a tarp, but not plastic. It was fabric. Canvas. Ray stopped. "We didn't pass this on the way in." Lila squinted. "That's not tarp, it was a jacket. One of those thick, old logging coats. The inside had been turned out and nailed flat to the bark like some kind of pelt. It was still damp. We kept walking, faster now, but the trail didn't feel right. It should have dipped left and downhill. Instead, it climbed. The terrain opened into a clearing. The same clearing, same broken stump, same slant of ground, same cabin. We stared at it for a long time. No one said anything. No one needed to. We already knew. We went back inside. It was darker now. Everything looked just as we'd left it, except for one thing. The mirror from the back room was now mounted above the stove, and in that mirror we saw ourselves, the three of us, standing, still. Then our reflections began to move. They stepped forward, independently, not mirroring our movements, just walking across the room, slowly circling. I looked down at my hands. Nothing was off. But in the mirror, my double had turned toward Ray's reflection, which now had its mouth wide open, screaming, though we heard nothing. Lila turned and walked out. I didn't hesitate. I followed her. I didn't look back. We walked without speaking, faster, more focused, not trying to retrace our steps, just trying to get away from the cabin. When we finally saw gravel, I almost collapsed. The truck was still there, parked exactly where we'd left it. Ray didn't stop. "Ray," I called. "The truck's here. We're done." He kept walking. We shouted, no response. I caught up to him and grabbed his shoulder. He turned, and for a split second, I swear his mouth wasn't right. It was too wide, the lips too thin, teeth too many. Then he blinked and looked confused. "What?" I told him he'd walked past the truck. He looked back, surprised, said he didn't remember seeing it. We got in and drove back to town. No one said a word the entire way.